Okay, so if you spend any time at all in like education or maybe corporate training or even just scrolling online lately, you know that critical thinking is, well, it's the king of the buzzwords, right? It's absolutely everywhere. But what does it actually mean?
It's a really interesting area because for ages the thinking was, that you'd just sort of pick these skills up indirectly.
Right.
We teach you history or maybe chemistry, and somehow by looking at sources or lab results, you just automatically learn to think critically.
Yeah, teach the content and add
Yeah.
loose. Poof, critical thinker. But our sources are pretty clear on this. Educators are really starting to doubt that whole indirect thing, that passive approach.
Definitely losing faith in it.
So if we actually want you, the listener, to develop these crucial skills, these transferable skills, sometimes they're called critical creative thinking skills,
Yeah.
we have to teach them
Yeah.
explicitly, directly, and you have to practice them.
And that's really our mission for this deep dive, isn't it? To get past the buzz. We're aiming to pull out some, clear, usable definitions and maybe a model for how you can actually improve these skills. We're tracing it back, the modern stuff, over 100 years.
This is the start of the research, basically.
Yeah, but if you want to go really far back.
Well, we're talking Socrates,
Yeah,
2,000 years.
we are. I mean, the Socratic method, fundamentally, it's all about questioning your assumptions, finding the warrants, the reasons for your beliefs.
So when we go back that far, is it more about like the structure of an argument or just being willing to question things? Maybe question authority.
It's a bit of both, but primarily that willingness,
Yeah.
questioning if a belief is actually justified.
Hmm.
And, that's exactly where we need to kick off the modern analysis with John Dewey. People often call him the father of the modern critical thinking tradition.
Okay, Dewey. And he talked about reflective thinking.
He did. And his definition is, well, it's foundational. It's the active, persistent, and careful consideration of a belief.
Active, persistent, careful.
Yeah, considering it in light of the grounds that support it and also, the further conclusions it points towards.
Okay, so the key there sounds like active versus passive.
Exactly. Dewey's point was that too often we take stuff in passively, make a snap decision, or we just absorb a belief without really looking into the reasons, the grounds behind it.
Hmm.
For Dewey, thinking well means having warranted beliefs. You need reasons, defensible ones that actually hold up when you look closely.
And that word persistent seems important too, like fighting our own biases. It's not enough just to pause for a second. You have to keep at it, check those grounds properly.
Absolutely. You can't just stop at the first reason that pops into your head. So if Dewey laid this foundation, this need for good reasons, who took that idea and made it something, measurable, standardized.
Ah, that sounds like Edward Glaser.
Right on, Edward Glaser.
He was co-author of that huge assessment, the Watson-Glaser Critical Thinking Appraisal. So yeah, his work really cemented the concept institutionally. He gave us that three-part definition.
Just the one. He saw critical thinking needing basically three things. First, an attitude, like a willingness, a disposition to really think things through thoughtfully.
Okay, attitude first.
Second, you need the knowledge. You have to know about logical methods, about how reasoning works.
Right, the tools.
And third, you need the actual skill to use those methods. And what's interesting, maybe a subtle shift from Dewey, but important, Glaser talked about evidence instead of grounds when discussing what supports a belief.
Evidence instead of grounds. Okay, that makes it feel a bit more empirical, maybe? Focused on data you can point to?
Yeah, I think so. It nudges it slightly in that direction. But if we want to connect this thinking to like immediate practical results, we should probably talk about Robert Ennis. His definition got really popular because it ties the skill directly to, well, doing things.
Ennis. Okay, his was reasonable, reflective thinking that is focused on deciding what to believe or do.
See, it explicitly connects that reflective process from Dewey to a practical end goal. Making a decision. You're thinking, but you're thinking towards making a choice, deciding something.
That actually brings up a point, though. If it's just about logical, reflective thought for deciding things, does that mean, say, a brilliant strategist using perfect logic for maybe unethical goals? Are they still a critical thinker? Does the intent matter here?
That's a really deep question, and the research does wrestle with it. Ennis's definition seems to focus on the reasonableness of the process itself, maybe regardless of the ethics. But the next wave of researchers, especially Richard Paul, they started focusing less on the external decision and more on the internal quality of the thinking. How good is the thinking itself?
Okay. So that leads us to Richard Paul and this idea of deliberately getting better at thinking.
Exactly. Paul defined critical thinking as like a mode of thinking. It's where the thinker actively improves their own thinking quality by skillfully taking charge of how thinking works, its structures,
Taking the charge.
and imposing intellectual standards on those structures.
Okay. Intellectual standards. And this is that idea of thinking about your thinking, right? Metacognition.
That's it precisely.
Huh.
Metacognition. It's realizing you're not just, having thoughts happen to you. You can actively manage them, correct your own process.
But wait, what exactly are these intellectual standards? Is that just like basic logic again, or is it something more specific?
Oh, much more specific, more prescriptive, really. Paul talked about standards like clarity, accuracy, precision, relevance, depth, fairness, things like that.
Okay.
So if your thinking is maybe a bit fuzzy, lacks precision, you have to deliberately step in and say, okay, need more precision here. Or if your argument is shallow, you force yourself, right, need to go deeper.
So it's like being your own thinking coach in real time, applying these benchmarks to what your brain is doing. But I mean, that still feels a bit abstract. If we want to fix that problem of just teaching indirectly, we need a clearer model for how you actually improve, right?
We definitely do. And luckily, the sources give us a really good analogy for learning this skill. Think about critical thinking, like learning a sport. There's this great story about coaching 11-year-old girls in
I
basketball.
like this one. Because we often just assume because we do something naturally like breathing or even thinking that we're doing it well. But yeah, the story goes the girls playing at first was just chaos,
Yeah.
right? Really ineffective.
Total chaos. They wanted to score, sure, but the way they went about it was all wrong. Just chasing the ball in a big clump, everyone jamming up the key.
Okay, so what's the thinking equivalent of that? Chasing the ball chaotically.
Well, it's the kind of disorganized thinking you see all the time, isn't it? Jumping straight to a conclusion, maybe letting your emotions run the argument, or just, believing the first headline you see without even checking the source.
Gotcha.
So in the basketball example, the coach had to stop the game, had to point out, look, this isn't working. And then crucially, show them a good, skilled model for the basic moves, how to pivot properly, how to shoot with good form,
Yeah.
how to actually guard an opponent effectively.
And the key wasn't just talking about the model, right? It was the practice. They had to literally stop the game, get into pairs, and just drill those specific skills. Focus only on the mechanics, not even worrying about the score at that point.
That's it exactly. And critical thinking is precisely the same process. If your thinking is, say, disorganized, first you've got to spot the bad habit. That's your chaotic play. Then you need to find a good, skilled model of thinking, maybe like using Glazer's framework we talked about. And then you have to commit to practicing the fundamental skills explicitly. Pull them out, isolate them from the heat of a real-world argument until doing them right becomes, well, second nature.
All right, so what are those fundamentals then? Glazer's work, you mentioned his framework. Did he give us like a toolkit, the specific drills the coach would teach?
He did provide a really helpful list of fundamental abilities. These are the specific competencies that, when you practice them, build up that skill component of critical thinking. He listed quite a few. But if you, the listener, want an actionable checklist, think about these. The ability, A, to recognize problems when they arise.
Okay, recognize problems.
Then C, to gather and marshal the relevant information, the stuff that actually pertains to the problem. Also D, to recognize unstated assumptions and values that might be hiding in an argument. That's a big one.
Unstated assumptions, yeah. Always tricky.
And finally, maybe, to test the generalizations and conclusions you come to. Do they actually hold up under scrutiny?
That list feels really practical. Like
Mhm.
that's the drill sheet you'd use in practice. But this feels like the crucial moment, right? Where we circle back to Glazer's first component, the attitude, the disposition, just having the skills, knowing the drills. That's not enough, is it?
This is maybe the single most critical takeaway from all the sources we looked at. You can have perfect knowledge of logic. You could ace a test on how to judge if a source is credible. But if you don't use the skill, if you choose not to bother checking that source, or you ignore an assumption because it's uncomfortable, then your skill is just sitting there, useless, inert.
And in that case, you're still just as likely to be misled. You might be capable of amazing thinking, but you end up gullible anyway, simply because you didn't, well, put in the effort to actually use the skill.
Couldn't have said it better. The moral of the story really is you have to build the habit of using these skills when they're needed. It's the difference between just being able to think critically and actually being a critical thinker, someone whose default mode is to apply that effort.
And that connects perfectly back to the problem we started with, the whole passive teaching idea. If skills are only taught indirectly, you never learn the habit of applying them. You might know what an assumption is abstractly, but you don't automatically look for them in everyday arguments.
Precisely. And this need for effort, for active engagement, is why we need to wrap this up by thinking about the concept as more than just, finding flaws. Michael Scriven offered a really good active definition that pulls together this idea of disposition and skill.
Okay, Scriven's take.
He defines it as stilled and active interpretation and evaluation. Interpretation and evaluation applied to observations, communications, information, arguments, all of it.
Okay.
He stresses that it's a skilled activity. It requires ongoing effort.
Skilled and active. Got it.
But the final piece, the thing that justifies calling it critico-creative thinking, is that creative element. Often when people hear critical thinking, they just think of criticizing, right, finding fault, the critic part.
Yeah, it can sound pretty negative, just tearing things down.
Mm-hmm.
But real critical thinking needs to be constructive too, surely.
It absolutely has to be. If you're looking at argument A, you can't just stop once you've pointed out its flaws, its fallacies. Genuinely skilled, creative thinking demands more. It demands you imagine other possibilities, alternatives that weren't even mentioned in argument A. You need to consider different options, try to see the issue from multiple angles, multiple points of view.
So it's not just about judging what's there. It's also about imagining what could be there. If someone argues A, you need to generate B, C, and D in your own head before you decide what makes the most sense. That's the creative spark.
That's exactly where the creativity comes in. And it's fascinating, isn't it, how these definitions kind of build on each other? You start with Dewey's basic need for persistent, justified belief.
Right. The foundation.
Then Ennis links it to the practical outcome, making decisions.
What to believe or do.
And it all leads towards Scriven's idea of this ongoing, skilled, active process that involves both interpretation and evaluation. It paints a really complete picture.
Yeah, looking back at our mission for this deep dive, it feels like we've got that blueprint now. Critical thinking isn't just knowing stuff. It's an active, skilled habit that you have to practice. It demands persistence, applying those clear standards like accuracy, clarity, and most importantly, having the disposition, that willingness to actually use the skills day to day. It's like coaching your own mind.
It is. And that really leads to the final, maybe slightly provocative thought that seems to run through all this research. The sources strongly suggest that even people who are really skilled thinkers, people who have all the tools, can still make terrible judgments if they simply choose not to engage those skills. So the real question for you, the listener, isn't just if you have the toolkit or if you can find a good model for thinking.
The real question is, are you willing to make that continuous effort? That intellectual effort to build the habit of thinking carefully, persistently, reflectively in all parts of your life. Not just when a test or a big meeting forces you to. That effort, building the habit, that's the ultimate deep dive.
It really is. It's all about that commitment to practice.
Well, thank you for joining us as we really unpacked the core structure of critical thinking today.